There are mornings that seem ordinary. Sunlight falls on the runway, the familiar rhythm of baggage carts echoes. People board the plane with light hearts, hoping only that their journey will go smoothly. But then, in just a moment, the whole world can turn in a direction no one could have predicted. 10 minutes after a black woman was escorted off a plane like a troublemaker, the entire runway at JFK Airport was closed. Over 100 flights were grounded. Thousands of passengers were bewildered, and all because of her. If you were sitting in that airplane cabin that morning, how would you react? Would you stand up or remain silent? Would you believe the person who speaks loudly or the person who remains silent? This story isn't just for listening. It's for self-reflection. If you appreciate stories that touch upon the realities of life, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can embark on this emotional journey together. Mornings in New York sometimes arrive slowly, especially in early autumn when the sun isn't as intense as in summer and the cool breeze makes one feel like slowing down. Near Runway 7 at JFK Airport, the golden light stretches across the metal surfaces of the parked planes, reflecting in rhythmic patches of light. It's the kind of light that evokes thoughts of a good start. Dr. Naomi Ellis used to think the same way. She set her small suitcase down beside the waiting area and took a sip of warm cappuccino. The gentle bitterness spread across her tongue, calming the lingering thoughts from the previous night. She had a habit of drinking coffee slowly, as if every second was worth savoring. Others perceived her as quiet and reserved, but Naomi understood in her high-pressure job composure wasn't a personality trait, it was a choice. This morning, for the first time in months, she felt her heart beat at a steady rhythm. No rush, no extreme tension, just peace. But even in such rare moments, Naomi's mind remained focused on the mission ahead. Today's flight will take her to the Nevada test range, where the engineering team is waiting for her to complete the final activation of the Sentinel Array, a top-secret defensive satellite system that she has dedicated nearly 3 years of her life to leading. The quantum seed, the device in that small briefcase, is the final key. Without her, no one else can activate it. Not because she wants exclusivity, but because national defense security protocols do not allow two people to share the activation rights to a system of this magnitude. That's the responsibility she chose, and sometimes it's as heavy as the midday sky. Naomi glanced around the waiting area. Passengers sat among the woven blue and gray benches. Some were engrossed in their phones, others were checking emails, and some were dozing off for a few minutes. A little girl was sucking on a lollipop, swinging her legs to the rhythm of a song in her headphones. An elderly man with silver hair was folding a copy of the New York Times. Everything felt so ordinary and familiar, making Naomi feel a sense of relief. She loves moments like these, true reminders that the world isn't just about pressure, battles of wits, meetings, and life-or-death decisions. It also has sparkling eyes, children's laughter, and quiet conversations about what to eat for dinner. That's why even as the CEO of Q Prime Defense Solutions, she always chooses to arrive early, sit amidst this quiet crowd, and appreciate the simple beauty of everyday life. She looked at her watch. 7:26 a.m., 34 minutes until boarding time. Naomi picked up her phone and opened the email app. Over 40 unread emails. She sighed softly. It's okay, I can read them tonight, she thought to herself. It was a choice, too, prioritizing her own peace of mind, rather than letting work consume her breath. Beside her, a middle-aged woman was talking on the phone louder than usual. Naomi overheard a few sentences about an auction in Manhattan. Her voice was booming with a hint of boastfulness. Naomi smiled slightly. She knew this type of person, not bad, not malicious, just used to being the center of attention. She bent down to adjust the strap of her bag. The quantum seed lay in the secure compartment programmed with fingerprint recognition. Touching the cool metal, Naomi gently closed her eyes. She whispered to herself like a small promise, "We're almost there. Just a little more." An announcement blared from the loudspeaker. Flight QP 217 to Nevada was ready for boarding in a few minutes. Naomi took a deep breath. It felt like the wind had just changed direction. Before standing up, she glanced back at the chair one last time. But she had no idea that in just a few dozen minutes, all the peace she felt at that moment would vanish as if it had never existed. Because sometimes the most ordinary day is the day that tests people's character the most. From a distance, Naomi Ellis appears to be the epitome of a successful, yet discreet woman, always opting for a well-fitting blazer, a compact handbag, and eyes as calm as a still lake. But what you see is only the tip of the iceberg of a life forged by challenges many would have given up on long ago. Naomi grew up in the southern suburbs of Atlanta, in a neighborhood where people knew each other by the sound of their bicycle bells. Her mother was a night shift nurse, and her father was an electrician. Life wasn't luxurious, but it was warm in the simplest way. Late dinners after her mother's shift, her father's laughter as they watched old movies together, and a gentle squeeze of her hand whenever she was upset. There are things people don't see when they look at a CEO like Naomi. They don't see the little girl who used to stand shyly in class, hiding her hands in her pockets so the teacher wouldn't start a discussion she wasn't ready for. They don't see the 16-year-old who sat for hours by an old radio in the garage taking it apart to see why it stopped working. And they certainly don't see the time she received a full scholarship, only to have a wealthy parent whisper that she was only chosen because the school needed to diversify. Who wouldn't be hurt by such words? But instead of harboring anger, Naomi often chose to sigh at those puzzled looks. She learned to let her strength come from within, not from rebuttals or ostentation. When she founded Q Prime Defense Solutions, many were skeptical. A black woman. In the field of defense, cybersecurity, praise was scarce, and frowns were common. But she persevered thanks to her near-perfect precision of thought, and a deep conviction that what she did mattered not for fame but to protect something greater than herself. She always reminds her employees, technology may be powerful, but it's the people who ultimately determine where it goes. And that's how she lives. The quantum seed lay dormant in the small pouch at Naomi's feet. A device smaller than her hand, yet composed of millions of lines of quantum code, it could change the landscape of space defense. It was like a second heart Naomi had to carry, vulnerable, but also incredibly important. But despite the heavy responsibilities she holds, Naomi still cherishes simplicity in her daily life. She prefers driving herself to the airport instead of using a shuttle service. She prefers buying her coffee in a paper cup instead of the ceramic one in the VIP lounge. She enjoys strolling through the small souvenir shops in the airport, reading postcards featuring the sky or the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset. Perhaps that's how she keeps herself from becoming someone who lives solely on reports and codes. When the airport staff called out the first group of passengers, Naomi stood up, gently rotating her shoulders to relax. She felt a slight tension in her chest, a feeling familiar to anyone in a position of great responsibility. Not fear, not insecurity, just alertness to something important. She walked into the boarding line. In front of her, an elderly couple was struggling with an oversized bag. Naomi bent down to help them lift it onto the inspection conveyor belt with a gentle smile. They thanked her with simple, grateful eyes that warmed Naomi's heart. That was also the moment she fell in love with people, no matter where they came from, what color their skin was, or what their beliefs were. Naomi always believed that deep down everyone has a good side, but sometimes kindness isn't enough to protect them from more incomprehensible things. As Naomi stepped into the cabin, she paused for a second to inhale the familiar scent of the air, a hint of new plastic, a touch of seat fabric, a hint of luggage still slightly cold from the runway. The distant sound of the engines formed a steady background, like a wordless song that anyone who had ever flown could recognize. Seat, 14C. Aisle seat, her favorite seat. She placed the bag perfectly in the overhead compartment right in the middle, neatly. Everything was perfectly organized, just as Naomi always tried to do with her life. But just as she zipped up her dress, a voice spoke from behind her. A voice tinged with the familiar harshness and authority of someone accustomed to demanding obedience. "Excuse me, that's my space." A blonde woman, elegantly dressed in an expensive style, stood behind her. Claudia Harris. Naomi didn't know her name at the time, but the feeling she had about this woman, a kind of air of sophistication and coldness, immediately registered in her memory. Naomi turned her head and smiled politely. "I think this is compartment 14. My bag fits, there's still room for you." Claudia raised an eyebrow. "I need the whole compartment. My husband and I always keep our luggage together." "Could you move the bag down there?" Naomi's smile faltered, a hint of embarrassment crossing her face. But she maintained her gentle tone. "I'm sorry, but I can't let this device out of sight. I think you still have room in the front compartment." Claudia rolled her eyes. "Always the attitude," she muttered, loud enough for Naomi to hear. Naomi remained silent. Not because she was giving up, but because she knew that sometimes arguments only open up unnecessary avenues. Claudia stood there, her eyes blazing with a sense of insult, while Naomi merely breathed softly. But deep inside she felt a familiar pang of pain, a feeling that any successful black person has experienced at least a few times in their life, a feeling that was both exhausting and difficult to put into words. The way other people look at you. The skeptical tone of voice. The unspoken assumptions they make about you before you even introduce yourself. That feeling, Naomi thought she was used to it, but this morning it made her heart skip a beat. She wondered, why is it that sometimes just being myself can be so exhausting? Naomi leaned slightly to one side to avoid creating further tension. She was used to handling uncomfortable situations in the gentlest way possible. Not out of fear, but because she knew sometimes other people's self-esteem is more fragile than they think. But Claudia Harris was different. She didn't find that softness. What she saw was a black woman in business attire, standing in the way of her desired path. And for people like Claudia, that was enough reason to be annoyed. The cabin still had many empty seats. The cool air from the air conditioning system blended the scent of new seat fabric and plastic into a familiar fragrance of every flight. Passengers busily searched for their seats. The occasional sound of zippers on suitcases could be heard, along with children asking their mothers when the plane would take off. A few people quickly sent one last text message before airplane mode switched on. No one paid close attention to the exchange between Claudia and Naomi for very long. But a few glances did fall, then quickly averted, as if they were afraid of being drawn into trouble they weren't prepared to face. Naomi offered a small smile, a smile that said, "I don't want a conflict," but also didn't seem weak. "Just put your bag in front. There's plenty of room," Claudia pouted. "I don't need your directions. I need you to move your bag. I want this spot." That statement, though spoken softly, was as sharp as a paper cutter. It wasn't a request, it was a command. The kind of tone someone used to giving orders to others for a long time. Naomi blinked. A moment of hesitation. She tried to keep her voice as soft as possible. "I understand, but the equipment I'm carrying can't be removed from the overhead compartment in the correct position." "A device? Who do you think you are, a secret agent?" Claudia sneered, her voice loud enough for a few nearby seats to hear. Naomi was about to reply, but she stopped. Life experience had taught her that explaining things didn't always lead to understanding. Sometimes it even made things worse. She chose to remain silent. That silence was unintentionally misinterpreted. A young man in the front seat glanced at Naomi with suspicion. An older woman shook her head slightly. These subtle reactions, unspoken, were all seen by Naomi, and in that moment she felt a dull ache, the feeling of being judged for something she hadn't yet said. The cabin door chimed. The flight attendant stepped in, her eyes quickly scanning the aircraft. Mark Benson, a young flight attendant with a gentle face, but showing the urgency of someone trying to handle many things at once. Claudia immediately called out to him as if she had just discovered evidence of a crime. "Excuse me. This woman is taking my overhead space." Mark paused. He looked at Naomi, then at Claudia. For a second, just a second, but Naomi saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. The next second he had sided with Claudia. "Ma'am," Mark said to Naomi, "if you could move the bags to another compartment it would be easier for us to sort through." Naomi pursed her lips. A slow breath escaped her. "I can't. This is work equipment. I need to keep it close to me." Claudia frowned intensely. "See, I told you. That kind of attitude makes me feel unsafe." Naomi turned to look at Claudia, her gaze gentle but weary. "I'm just keeping my bag in the right place." Mark straightened his back, his voice becoming firmer. "Ma'am, if any passenger feels unsafe, I am obligated to report it to the supervisor." Unsafe. Naomi heard the word echo like an empty drumbeat in the cramped space. How many times in her life had people said that about her? How many times had her composure been misinterpreted as indifference, her silence as threatening? How many times do people like Claudia say, "I feel unsafe," simply because the other person isn't like them? Naomi didn't want to make a big deal out of a small thing, but she also couldn't let others decide her worth based on their own prejudices. She spoke softly but clearly, "I'm not endangering anyone. I just want to sit in my seat." A moment of silence, short but heavy as lead. Mark lightly bit his lower lip. The pressure increased as the air thickened. Claudia crossed her arms, feigning victimhood. A few passengers began to pay attention, some pulling out their phones just to hold them in their hands, as if reflexively sensing that something was about to happen. Mark breathed heavily. "I'll call the supervisor." Naomi looked down at the cabin floor. The dark blue carpet reminded her of the carpet in her office where she used to stand for hours analyzing security code sequences. There, she was the one in charge. Here, she was just a passenger who had been misunderstood. In that moment, Naomi felt something she didn't want to admit. Even though she was the CEO, even though she led hundreds of engineers, even though she held the equipment that the nation placed its trust in, she could still be rendered meaningless by a stranger, simply because of who she is, or because of who others think she is. Claudia cleared her throat. "I don't want to sit near her. I don't feel safe. I'd like to change seats or request that she handle this." Naomi took a deep breath. A long breath. She could hear her heart slow down just like it did whenever she was about to enter an important negotiation. But this time, she wasn't facing cutting-edge technology nor a defense contract, but a small but incredibly difficult-to-break prejudice. Supervisor Dylan Brooks stepped into the cabin. His sturdy build and husky voice suggested he'd been through several stressful shifts before. He looked at Claudia with sympathy, the kind of sympathy Naomi had seen since she'd been misunderstood by her teacher when she was 10 years old. "What's up, Claudia?" recounted the story with exaggeration interspersed with feigned sighs. Naomi remained silent. Not because she couldn't speak, but because she realized something painful. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Dylan turned to Naomi, his stern gaze making the atmosphere tense. "Ma'am, we need your cooperation. Please move your bag." Naomi looked at him for a long time. "I understand the rules of the plane, but she's asking me to give up my seat just because she wants to put her bag next to her husband's." "I'm not refusing to cooperate, but I can't do something so unreasonable." Dylan blinked. "We don't have time for arguing. If you continue to disobey the flight attendant's requests, we will have to ask you to disembark." A long silence. So long that Naomi heard a child at the back of the cabin ask its mother, "What's going on?" Naomi turned her palm over her thumb, lightly touching the zipper of the pocket. It was a habit she had whenever she had to decide between two opposing sides, to endure or to stand up. The answer came very slowly, but very surely. She lifted her head, her eyes as deep as the evening water. "If you want to invite me off the plane, I'll go. But I won't do something unreasonable to please someone who's trying to insult me. Claudia chuckled sarcastically. See, I told you so. With that kind of attitude, Naomi didn't look at her anymore. She looked towards the emergency exit, seeing a small light filtering through the curtains like a final punctuation mark in what had been an overly peaceful morning. At the end of the hallway, Dylan's voice was heard calling loudly, "Security, please come to row 14. We need assistance. No one knows." In just a few minutes, this very decision will change the entire order of the airport. And no one knew. The woman standing silently in the airplane cabin would become the focal point of an unprecedented event in JFK history. When the two airport security officers appeared in the aisle, the atmosphere in the cabin seemed to shrink by half. No one spoke, but all eyes turned towards seat 14, where Naomi stood silently, her hands gripping the straps of her bag across her chest, as if letting go for even a second would plunge her entire body into a void of despair. She wasn't the type to panic easily. 3 years leading the Sentinel Array project had molded her with 16-hour workdays, tense meetings, and moments of failure that would have made many want to give up. But being in the middle of an airplane cabin misunderstood and put in a dangerous position, simply because of a word from a stranger, left her with an indescribable sadness. One of the two security guards, a tall, kind-eyed man in his 42nds named Paul, slowly stepped forward. He bowed slightly, not too low to appear submissive but enough to show respect. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and calm, "we've been called in due to a report of a passenger not following flight attendant instructions. Could you please explain what's going on?" Naomi let out a soft sigh. A long sigh, but not an angry one. "I was just putting my bag in the correct overhead compartment for my seat," she said, her voice even soft and steady. "This woman wanted me to move my bag so she could put it next to her husband's. I refused. And then it turned out like this." Paul nodded, his eyes scanning Naomi's face for signs of tension. None. Only weariness and a wounded pride, struggling to hold its ground. Claudia immediately interjected her voice, a low hiss like the sound of something being pulled through fabric. She was rude. She raised her voice at me. I didn't feel safe. That's why I asked for help. Naomi turned to look at Claudia. A very gentle, very direct, very sad look. "I've never raised my voice to you." Claudia crossed her arms as if afraid of losing her victim persona. "Well, that's how it felt to me." That statement was like a knife plunged into a wooden table. Not because it was sharp, but because it was so familiar. Naomi had heard it countless times in her life. "That's how I feel. No proof needed, no reason needed. Just one person's feeling is enough to decide another's fate." Dylan Brooks' supervisor blinked slightly, as if trying to convince himself he was doing the right thing. "Miss Ellis, having passengers feel unsafe is a serious matter. We cannot take off while there's still an argument." Naomi lowered her eyes. "Nobody's arguing. I just can't do something unreasonable." Paul looked at Dylan, then at Claudia. He could clearly see which side was being swayed by emotion. But procedure is procedure, and he was in a position to act quickly. "Miss Ellis," Paul said slowly, as if carefully choosing his words, "we need you to step out of the cabin to speak privately so as not to disturb other passengers." Naomi looked up. No resistance, no struggle. Just a big question mark in her eyes. Why do things like this still happen? She took half a step back, picked up the bag containing the quantum seed, and held it close to her body. "Okay," she said, her voice so soft that Claudia felt as if she'd just shot someone who was standing still. "I'll go with you." But before leaving her seat, Naomi turned back to look at Claudia one last time. A look that held neither resentment nor resignation. It simply asked a question, without needing to be spoken aloud. "Why does my existence bother you so much?" Claudia avoided his gaze. Not because she had won, but because for a very brief moment she felt Naomi wasn't the person she thought she was. And that feeling made her uneasy. As Naomi walked along the narrow aisle of the cabin, several passengers moved aside as if to avoid bumping into something they didn't quite understand. A middle-aged man looked at her with a questioning gaze. An elderly woman sitting by the window gently raised her hand to her chest, a small gesture of sympathy, but too timid to be considered a real act. In the entire cabin, only one person stepped outside their comfort zone, the young man sitting in seat 14. A, who had been watching the conversation with restrained eyes, gently pulled his earphones down and spoke loudly enough to be heard. "She didn't do anything wrong. I'm sitting right here. Things aren't like she's saying." The space froze in place for a moment. Claudia spun around. "Excuse me." The young man named Alex Saunders was unfazed by her gaze. "I saw, and I heard." She was calm from beginning to end. Paul looked at him, then at Naomi. A flicker of suspicion crossed the man's eyes. He turned to Mark, the young flight attendant. "Is what this young man said true?" Mark swallowed. His gaze wavered. He glanced at Claudia, then down at the ground. I only heard Miss Harris say she was being harassed." Paul frowned. "Did you hear Miss Ellis speaking loudly?" Mark remained silent. The silence wasn't long, but it was enough for Naomi to hear her heart pounding. The truth is on her side. She can say more. She can argue forcefully. She can demand the right to be treated fairly. But Naomi only smiled slightly. Not a smile of joy. Rather, the smile of someone all too familiar with having to choose between what is right and what is right. "It's all right," she said softly, breaking the tense silence. "I'll get off the plane." Alex glared. "You shouldn't do that. They're wrong." Naomi just looked at him, her eyes seemingly saying thank you for speaking up. "But sometimes to maintain peace, we choose to take a step back." She turned to Paul and nodded. "Let's go." The corridor connecting to the cabin was narrow and cool, white light falling on Naomi's shoulders as she stepped out. She heard the cabin door close behind her, a small sound familiar to any frequent passenger, but this time it resonated like a punctuation mark, halting a chapter she hadn't chosen. Paul walked beside her, saying nothing. When they reached the waiting area, he stopped. "Miss Ellis, I'm sorry for this experience. I'm not sure what happened, but you were very calm. I think you deserve a clearer explanation." Naomi nodded slightly. "I know you're just doing your job. I hope everything will be clarified soon." Naomi managed a smile that, despite her efforts to remain calm, betrayed a hint of sadness. "Thank you." But when Paul left standing alone in the empty hallway, Naomi felt a sense of emptiness settle over her like a thin layer of dust on a long, untouched tabletop. This time she asked herself, not in words but in a deep silence, why is it that, just because I don't back down, everything immediately becomes a problem? And at that very moment, Naomi's phone in her pocket rang. A red warning code lights up on the screen. "Quantum seed has been displaced from assigned transport." Naomi stood motionless. The injustice has only just begun. Naomi's phone continued to ring. This time, it wasn't a technical alert. A call from the secure line Vanden Defense Command. She stared at the screen for a second. Just a second, but that was enough to send a shiver down her spine. Naomi picked up the phone. "Dr. Ellis, reporting on the situation," a deep male voice said. It was General Matthew Reed, the supervisor of the entire Sentinel Array program. Naomi stepped into a corner of the hallway so no one could hear. "General, I was forced off the flight." There was a heavy silence, like stones falling to the bottom of a well. "The reason?" Reed asked, his voice barely a thread. Naomi took a deep breath. "I had a conflict with a passenger. They thought I was causing a disturbance even though I didn't do anything." Half a second later, Reed's voice turned icy. "Did you bring the quantum seed? I'm holding on, but the flight has closed. Without me, they'll lose the activation gate." Reed spoke slowly as if suppressing anger. "Dr. Ellis, if you're not in Nevada by 5:00 p.m. Eastern Time, the Sentinel Array won't be able to activate in time for the safety window. And you know what that means." Naomi closed her eyes. Yes, she knew all too well. The 3 satellites dependent on the Sentinel Array's signals were in a critical phase of orbital transition. Even a small time deviation could throw the entire system off balance. "How many hours do we have left?" Naomi asked. 4 hours and 20 minutes, Reed replied. A harsh number. An unbreakable limit. Reed continued, his voice serious and urgent. "You were removed from the plane through civilian procedure, but for us that's a security threat. You're the only one who can complete the final layer of Sentinel's code. If you don't get away, the $3.7 billion plan will be a useless pile of scrap metal." Naomi looked out the large window in the hallway. Outside, the midday sun shone on the long, silvery white aircraft. Everything looked strangely peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm brewing around her. "I'll come up with a plan," she said slowly, as if reassuring herself. Reed didn't answer immediately. She heard the rustling of papers and the hurried typing of a keyboard. Then he spoke. "I'll do my part. But Naomi, nobody but you can resolve the situation there." She closed her eyes, suppressing the sigh that threatened to escape her lips. "Yes, General." The call ended. The screen went black, reflecting Naomi's face calm, but beneath it lay a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She leaned against the glass railing. People streamed past like a never-ending river. Everyone was preoccupied with their own world. No one knew that just a few meters away, a woman was facing a decision that would affect an entire defense program. Naomi knew who she had to call next. Richard Hale, CEO of Q Prime, and someone who has believed in her for many years. Richard is the kind of person who, when things fall apart, will stand amidst the rubble and ask, "Is there a solution we haven't tried yet?" She called. Richard answered immediately, as if he had been standing next to the phone all along. "Naomi, have you boarded the plane yet?" His voice was hoarse, as if he had just run from the meeting room to his desk. Naomi swallowed softly. "I was forced off the flight." "Say that again." His voice suddenly dropped to a somber tone. Naomi recounted the story concisely. No embellishment, no exaggeration. Just the truth told in a voice as smooth as a lake in a gentle breeze. Richard was silent for 10 seconds. For Richard, 10 seconds of silence was a sign of suppressed anger. "Naomi, are you okay?" That question, simple as it was, made her heart sink for a moment. Not everyone asks that when they hear about an incident, but Richard did. "I'm fine, just a little tired." He sighed a long, heavy sigh. "JFK only has a few hours to reopen your flight. We don't have time to negotiate. Let me call the FAA." "Richard," Naomi whispered, "don't make things more complicated." He chuckled softly. Not a laugh of joy. "You were kicked off the plane because of a baseless accusation. Things are complicated enough already." She remained silent. He continued, "I'll call General Reed. Stay right there, don't go anywhere. We'll move you by military means if necessary." "Richard, nothing is too much when it comes to Sentinel." The call ended. Naomi relaxed her shoulders as if the weight of the whole world pressing down on her chest had just increased another layer. The airport loudspeaker blared, "Flight QP-217 to Nevada test range is now closing." That sentence was like a tiny needle piercing Naomi's heart. She instinctively turned her head, looking towards the boarding gate. The gate was slowly closing. Inside, the seats of the cabin where she had been sitting just minutes before were fading into the distance. The moment the window closed, she saw Alex Saunders, the young man who had defended her, standing nearby, his face flushed with anger. He ran to Naomi. "They haven't changed at all. I told them they handled it wrong, but the supervisor told me not to interfere." Naomi smiled faintly. "It's all right. Thank you for speaking up." Alex ruffled his hair, his eyes filled with frustration. "I hate this feeling of injustice. She really didn't do anything wrong." Naomi looked down at her hands that had guided hundreds of engineers, hands that had created world-leading technology, hands that held the fate of Sentinel Array in their hands. Yet just minutes before, she was seen as a nuisance that needed to be gotten rid of. She said softly, her voice low and tinged with sadness, "If everyone could always see things the right way, the world would be so much easier to live in." Alex pursed his lips and nodded emphatically. "What are you going to do now?" Naomi tightened the strap of her bag. "Without hesitation, without delay, I have to get to Nevada by any means." Right then, at the exact moment she said it, the phone rang again. A message from General Reed: "Stay where you are. The FAA is holding an emergency meeting. Do not leave the terminal." Another message arrived almost simultaneously from Richard Hale: "This won't stop at just putting you on another flight. They've interfered with my project." Naomi looked at the two messages. Then she looked at Alex. Then she looked at the plane slowly taxiing out of Gate 32, the plane that was supposed to take her to where she needed to be most. Injustice can make people angry, but for Naomi, it made her even more determined. She whispered, as if making a promise to herself, "No one is allowed to damage Sentinel." But she didn't know yet, in just a few minutes, a decision from the FAA would bring the entire JFK Airport to a standstill. A single wrong breath, a step backward, a small prejudice, all set to create a massive domino effect. And the epicenter is Naomi. The JFK Airport waiting area is usually crowded at lunchtime, but today, Naomi felt as if all the sounds were stretched out. The rolling of suitcase wheels on the stone floor, the distant boarding announcements, the giggling of children, all seemed to circle around her but not touch her. She stood still by the glass railing, watching each plane taxi onto the runway. Each time one took off, a strong blast of air pressed against the glass, gently ruffling her hair. But now that feeling no longer evoked peace. It was like a cruel reminder that time was passing faster than she could catch up. Her flight was taxiing out of the gate. Sentinel was waiting. The safety window was slowly closing towards the end of the day. And she, the only one who managed to activate the final layer of code, stands here eliminated on a baseless accusation. The phone vibrated. Another message from General Reed: "Prepare to receive your evacuation instructions. Do not leave the area." Naomi took a deep breath. The words "don't leave" made her understand this was no longer just her problem. It was becoming a larger mechanism. A mechanism where every small decision could alter the trajectory of the entire defense system. At the other end of the airport, a few gates away from Naomi, a private control room was locked. Inside, Thomas Blake, the FAA's Deputy Executive Director for the Northeast region, stood before a screen displaying the region's air traffic flow. One employee said quickly, "Sir, we have received a Level 1 priority directive from Space Command. They have confirmed that Dr. Naomi Ellis is the person carrying the Sentinel Array activation key. They are requesting full support." Thomas placed his glasses on the table. How could a civilian passenger be removed from a plane just because of a personal dispute? No one answered. Because the truth is, it happens every day, everywhere, for countless reasons. But it rarely involves a device that could determine national security. Thomas sighed. "Call the airport's chief supervisor directly, and keep me on the line with command." In his mind, the question wasn't, should we intervene, but rather, what's the quickest way to intervene? He looked at the flight path map. A glint appeared in his eyes. "If necessary, we will close off the entire ground until Dr. Ellis can be transferred to a military vehicle." An assistant's voice choked with emotion. "Sir, that's JFK. A single hour of work costs hundreds of millions of dollars." Thomas didn't turn around. "And if Sentinel fails, how much damage will that cause?" No one answered. Everyone understood. At Gate 32, where Naomi had been asked to disembark just 15 minutes earlier, everything was normal. Other passengers were sitting quietly waiting for takeoff, unaware that they were approaching one of those rare moments when an entire massive airport could be brought to a standstill by a military decision. In compartment 14, Claudia Harris was sipping water, her face showing an indescribable sense of contentment. Sitting next to her was her husband, Greg Harris, who had just moved from business class to check on his wife. "Are you okay?" Greg asked. Claudia sighed, looking tired. "That woman really annoys me. I don't understand why people can't be kinder." Greg nodded. "You did the right thing. If you feel uncomfortable, you have the right to speak up." A passenger sitting in front of her turned her head slightly, her eyes showing displeasure. But Claudia didn't notice. She didn't see the world through the eyes of others, she saw it through the lens of her own perceived rightness. What she didn't know was that at that very moment the stone she had inadvertently knocked down was rolling down a very long slope, and was about to strike a system far larger than she imagined. Naomi stood silently near the waiting area, her eyes scanning the QR code on her handbag, a routine check she performed whenever she felt stressed. The quantum seed was still there, lying there silent, like a metallic heart containing billions of lines of code that only she understood. Alex approached, hands in his pockets, his face wrinkled as if questioning the whole world. "You know," he said, "I've flown over 200 times in my life, and I've never seen anyone treated like that. They don't listen to you. They only listen to the person who speaks the loudest." Naomi chuckled softly. "Sometimes the person who speaks louder isn't the one who's right," Alex grumbled, "and yet they got to believe it." She turned to look at him. For the first time, there was a gentle light in Naomi's eyes, as if she saw herself from years ago, a young, frustrated person who believed in justice, who believed that if the truth were clear, everything would be all right. She whispered, "Thank you for speaking up. Don't think it's pointless. Good deeds always leave a mark." Alex scratched his head. "I just can't stand the injustice." Naomi tightened her grip on the bag strap. "I understand that better than you think." 10 minutes have passed. Naomi suddenly noticed that the rhythm of activity at the airport was changing. A subtle change, something an ordinary person wouldn't notice, but Naomi was perceptive. She first noticed the runway lights flashing unusually. Then came the announcement suspending boarding at other gates, something that rarely happened simultaneously. Finally, the sound of aircraft engines on the taxiway significantly decreased, as if someone was slowing down the entire airport. Alex looked around. "Something's strange." Naomi nodded. "Yes, very strange." An airport employee ran past, whispering to a colleague, "The FAA has raised the security level. All movement is halted until further notice." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine, not because of fear, because she understood the magnitude of that decision. She turned to look out at the runway. 2 planes preparing for takeoff suddenly stopped. It was as if someone had just pressed the pause button on the entire massive system. A heavy silence spread through the room. Alex's jaw dropped. "No way. They just stopped the entire runway." Naomi watched the sunlight reflecting off the floor through the window. "Maybe they're changing their shipping plans. Maybe because of me." Although she spoke very softly, Alex still heard. "You mean the FAA is trying to get you out of here before everyone else?" Naomi didn't answer immediately. She was trying to piece together the sequence of events in her head, from being forcibly taken off the plane to Reed's call to Richard's text message, all pointing to one scenario. A scenario orchestrated by the military. Just then, Naomi's phone rang. Not Richard's number, not Reed's number. It's the FAA's security line. Naomi switched on the machine. A woman's voice rang out, calm, but with the tone of someone familiar with giving orders. "Dr. Ellis, this is Deputy Director Karen Willis from the FAA Security Division. We have verified your identity and role in Project Sentinel. You must not leave the waiting area. A task force will approach you within 3 minutes." Naomi's heart slowed down. No longer a rhythm of anxiety. Instead, it was the rhythm of absolute concentration. "I understand," she said. Karen continued. "Until the team approaches, all flights at JFK are suspended, including QP-217. Please note this situation is considered a national priority." Alex heard enough for his eyes to widen as if he were watching a Hollywood movie scene. The whole airport stopped because of her. Naomi looked out at the runway where machines weighing hundreds of tons stood motionless like statues. She whispered, "No, because of Sentinel." But there was a layer of emotion in her voice that was hard to conceal, a small pain of being overlooked, a great sadness of the injustice of reality, and a quiet strength, something no one could take away. No one knows. In just a few minutes, Naomi will embark on a series of events that will shake the entire United States. 3 minutes is a very short amount of time. But when a massive airport comes to a standstill, 3 minutes can feel like an entire afternoon slowly passing by. Naomi stood alone by the glass railing, her hand lightly touching the strap of her bag, as if to confirm that Quantum Seed was still there, safe, quiet, but containing a secret that could change the nation's mind in seconds. Alex stood beside her, looking around anxiously. "Are you sure you're okay? I know something big is happening, but—" Naomi smiled faintly. A thin smile, but enough to soothe the person opposite her. "I've been through much more stressful situations than this. But thank you for always being there for me. That's no small thing." Alex scratched his head awkwardly. "I was just thinking, nobody should be treated the way she was." Naomi didn't answer immediately. She watched the crowd gathering in the distance. Passengers were beginning to stand, peering curiously out the windows as the plane came to a halt. Some people turned on their phones, whispering to relatives, "The runway has stopped. I don't know what's happening." People are always curious when something familiar suddenly stops working. From the left corner of the hallway, a group of 3 approached. They weren't running, they weren't in a hurry, but each step they took carried an air of power. 2 people wearing dark suits and earphones were walking ahead. The woman leading the way was about 1.75 meters tall, with a strong build and neatly tied back hair. She was Deputy Director Karen Willis, the one who had called Naomi a few minutes earlier. Alex swallowed. Oh, they really came looking for her. Naomi adjusted her collar and took a deep breath. "Yes, and we have to keep things in order." Karen stopped in front of Naomi. Her eyes quickly scanned the area, the shops, the cafes, the gleaming spaces where passengers stood watching. Only when she was sure there was no threat did she look directly at Naomi. "Dr. Ellis, Director Willis." Karen nodded briefly. "You are carrying equipment that the command has identified as top secret. For security reasons, we will remove you from this public area immediately." Naomi opened the bag, letting Karen see the metal edge of the Quantum Seed, enough to confirm the device's identity, without letting anyone else see the whole thing. Karen only nodded once more, but Naomi sensed tension in her voice. Karen turned to the 2 agents behind her. "Perimeter check. No recording allowed." They immediately dispersed, asking those nearby to put down their phones. Some passengers reacted, "Why, is something wrong? But this is a public airport, isn't it?" But no one dared argue for long when they saw the federal insignia peeking out from under the vest. Alex looked at the scene, then at Naomi, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. "Is she really that important?" Naomi shook her head slightly. "Not me. It's my job, and what it protects." Alex looked at her for a few seconds. "But if it's that important, then their decision to have you kicked off the plane, isn't that completely unreasonable?" Naomi didn't answer. Her gaze was distant, as if she were looking through the glass beyond the runway to where she needed to be, the Nevada test range, where the Sentinel Array awaited her. Karen understood the silence. She spoke, her voice slow but firm. "Dr. Ellis, sometimes the biggest systems collapse because of very small things. A wrong decision, a misunderstanding, a moment of losing composure, and the entire structure can crumble." Naomi sighed softly, her eyes reflecting a gentle sadness. "And sometimes, those little things stem from how people treat each other." Karen paused. She understood what Naomi was saying. No need to mention Claudia, no need to mention the baseless accusation. Black women, especially strong and successful ones, have faced this kind of judgment, not once. Karen changed her tone, becoming more practical. We have to go. They began to move. Not fast but not slow either, just the right speed for the message to spread. Don't get in their way. Alex took a few steps before Karen raised her hand to stop him. Excuse me, this is a restricted area. But Naomi turned back, her eyes warm. Thank you, Alex. Your kindness. I will remember. Alex stood there watching them walk away. He didn't fully understand what had happened. But he knew one thing he had just witnessed, something far bigger than a simple argument on a plane. As Karen's team escorted Naomi closer to the staff exit, Naomi noticed something strange. The airport became quieter and quieter. It wasn't the kind of quiet you'd find in the early morning. Rather, it was the kind of quiet a command issued from a very high place. On the large screen near Gate 29, a notice board displayed a series of red letters. Delayed, delayed, delayed. A worried family asked the service counter staff, "What's the problem? Is the weather bad?" The employee shook his head, speaking in a low voice, as if afraid someone might hear. "The system is currently being held up by federal order." Another man clicked his tongue and said, "The whole airport." For what reason, no one answered. But Naomi knew. Karen tilted her head, looking at Naomi as if reading her thoughts. "You understand this isn't a simple decision. Holding JFK ground for over an hour, that's unprecedented." Naomi looked down at her shoes, the flats she chose for easy movement around the airport, dark, simple, but which had accompanied her through many important meetings. She said softly, "Unfortunately, that only happened after I was seen as a nuisance." Karen looked straight at her without flinching. "Naomi, sometimes the system won't be on our side until they realize we're an indispensable part of it." Naomi narrowed her eyes and breathed slowly. "But people can ruin a part of the system just because of prejudice." Karen didn't object. She just nodded very slightly. As they turned into the technical corridor, Naomi saw 3 airport operators standing in front of control screens, anxiously monitoring information from the control tower. Runways, 4 liters, 4R, 22 liters, 22R ALL hold. No movement permitted. All aircraft stop immediately. A staff member nervously asked, What's going on?" Another employee whispered, "They say there's a national security issue. Someone important is being held." Naomi felt her heart tighten. She didn't want to be at the center of this chaos. She never wanted that. She just wanted to do her job quietly, with dedication. Karen placed her hand on Naomi's shoulder for a second. "Don't blame me. If you hadn't made it to Nevada, the problem would have been much bigger. But the most painful thing," Naomi said slowly, "is that it all started with a very small prejudice." "Small habits sometimes put an entire country at risk," Karen replied. They arrived at a metal door with a code lock. Karen inserted the key card and the door opened. Outside was the service parking area, a non-passenger zone. A black SUV was parked, engine running, rear door open. 2 other agents stood beside the vehicle. The wind from the runway blew in, stronger and colder than inside. The smell of jet fuel lingered, a smell Naomi was familiar with from hundreds of business trips, but this time, it was different. This time it felt like a rescue. Karen gestured, "Dr. Ellis, please get in the car, we're leaving now." Naomi stepped halfway up, then turned back to look at the airport over her shoulder. The planes in the distance, huge metallic wings, were motionless, as if time itself had stopped. Part of her wanted to say, "It doesn't have to be like this. It's not because of me." But another part, the strong, rational part of the leader, whispers, "Not for my sake, but for the mission." She turned around and got into the car. The door closed with a sharp, crisp click. The SUV started rolling, speeding across the runway where no aircraft were permitted to move. In that moment, Naomi understood America's largest airport came to a complete halt, to take a black woman who had been treated unfairly to exactly where she needed to be. A great and bitter paradox. When people treated her the least, she became the most important person. The black SUV sped along the concrete pavement of the technical area. At each turn, an airport security officer gestured for the vehicle to proceed. No checks, no questioning. At times, Naomi looked through the window and saw clearly power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply doors opening at the right moment. The wind from the parking lot swept against the steel hull of the plane, carrying the smell of fuel and the low rumble of the jet engine. But strangely, all those sounds seemed to be obscured by a heavy silence, the silence of hundreds of pilots waiting in the cockpit of thousands of passengers, wondering why the plane wasn't moving. Everything happened for a reason they didn't know. Naomi leaned back in her chair, placing her bag on her lap. Karen sat beside her, her eyes glued to the communication screen in her hand, displaying the route and security status. An agent at the front turned his head. "We'll take you to the helicopter landing pad south before transferring you to a military vehicle." Naomi nodded, even though she knew she had no other choice. Karen looked at Naomi as if to make sure she wasn't panicking. "Are you okay?" Naomi replied softly. "I'm not afraid. I'm just disappointed." "What do you regret?" Karen asked. "It's a shame that if everything had just been explained calmly, things wouldn't have turned out this way." Karen sighed. "Prejudice never comes alone. It comes with a false sense of security." Naomi pursed her lips. "And sometimes, that confidence is taken as truth." Their eyes met for a few seconds, a shared empathy difficult to describe. Karen was white, but she understood far better than many others. There are injustices that don't need to be pursued. They reveal themselves in the behavior of those who cause them. The SUV swerved sharply onto the internal road. Ahead, a group of technicians stood next to a gray helicopter, its rotors stationary but its beacon lights on. Karen turned to Naomi. "This isn't standard procedure. But time is running out. Dr. Ellis, you have to be in Nevada by 5:00 p.m. Naomi looked up at the sky, squinting slightly in the sunlight. "Sentinel is the dream of hundreds of people. I won't let it fail." Karen was surprised that the statement didn't come from a sense of duty, but from a very personal belief. When the SUV came to a stop, the two agents opened the doors simultaneously. A strong gust of wind blew directly at Naomi, gently ruffling her hair and sending it flying over her shoulders. A technician approached, bowing respectfully. "Dr. Ellis, we've prepared for the journey. But there's something you should know." Naomi paused slightly. "What is it?" He handed the tablet to Karen. Karen looked at it, then looked at Naomi with disbelief. "News has started to spread." "What news?" Naomi frowned. Karen didn't answer immediately. She turned on the sound. A video played Claudia's voice. "I didn't feel safe sitting next to her. She was aggressive." Next we see Naomi sitting silently, looking completely calm. And then Alex's voice can be heard in the clip. "She didn't do anything. She was calm the whole time." Naomi was stunned. "It was a secretly filmed video from inside the cabin," Karen said coldly. "This clip is spreading like wildfire. It looks like someone on the flight posted it on social media." Naomi felt her heart sink. "No, this shouldn't happen. I don't want this to become an open war." Karen gently squeezed her shoulder. "It wasn't your choice. But sometimes the truth needs to come to light." Naomi looked down at the concrete surface of the landing strip. Fine dust swirled up in the wind at her feet. "I don't want to be the center of attention. I just want to do my job well," Karen interrupted. "You're being misjudged, and that clip is reshaping how the world sees you." Naomi was silent. Some things were true, but it still hurt. Not far from them, a commercial aircraft was stopped in the middle of the taxiway. Inside the cockpit, the two pilots were talking to each other. The co-pilot said, "You know what I heard? It was all because one passenger was kicked off the plane." The chief pilot frowned. "This is the first time in 20 years I've seen this. Dismissing the wrong person, underestimating the wrong person. This can have serious consequences." Inside the rear compartment aboard Flight QP-217 itself, the atmosphere was more tense than outside. Claudia looked at her phone. Her face was pale. Her hands trembled when she saw the clip of herself with the title, "Black passengers were removed from the plane. The facts are not as alleged." Greg snatched the phone. His eyes widened. "Claudia, what have you done?" "Claudia," stammered I was just telling the truth. I was just saying I didn't feel safe." Greg rubbed his forehead. "The whole country is watching this clip." The passengers around them began to whisper, "Is it her? Oh my God. She's a blatant liar. I can't believe it." Claudia felt as if the chair beneath her back was disappearing. Everything she had ever believed she was right was crumbling like sand in a storm. Meanwhile, Naomi approached the helicopter, but before boarding she paused, gazing into the distance at the motionless section of the runway. She spoke softly, almost as a monologue. "All of this, simply because I refuse to back down in the face of injustice." Karen stood beside her. "No, Naomi. All of this, because people think a calm black woman must be in the wrong." Naomi didn't object. A strong wind swept in, carrying the distant roar of aircraft engines awaiting orders. Naomi's eyes shone with sadness, but beneath that sadness lay the strength of those who had endured a lifetime yet still stood tall. An agent ran up, his voice interrupting his thoughts. "Director Willis, we have a signal from Nevada. They say time is running out." Karen nodded emphatically. "Naomi, get on the plane." Naomi placed one foot on the helicopter floor, turned to look at Karen, and said something she would never forget. "If I'm seen as the problem today, then tomorrow I'll prove I'm the solution." Karen smiled, a rare smile from someone who had worked in security for many years. "We know. That's why we're taking you." Naomi stepped into the helicopter, placed her bag on the safety seat, and fastened the strap around it as if she were protecting a real life. The door closed, the fan blades began to spin. The wind swirled up so strongly that it carried runway dust into the air. Karen stood outside, gesturing to Naomi. And in that moment, the very instant the helicopter lifted off the ground, Naomi looked down at the motionless airport and thought, "I didn't choose to be the eye of the storm. But perhaps I was born to walk through it." The helicopter lifted off the ground, swayed gently, and then plunged southwest towards Nevada. Within Naomi's heart, amidst the sadness over the injustice, lay a fire that no one could extinguish. Sentinel was waiting. The mission was waiting. And for the first time that day she felt justice is also beginning to turn toward us. The whirring of the helicopter rotors in the air sounded like an urging call. Naomi peered through the small oval window. Below the entire landing strip, all the huge aircraft, all the bustling crowds in the terminal, they were all standing still. It wasn't because of technical issues. It wasn't because of the weather. It was because of a woman who was treated unfairly. That thought made her heart ache. She had never aspired to be a symbol for any movement. She just wanted to be treated like a human being and do the work she had dedicated half her life to. Inside the helicopter, an agent handed her a headset. "Dr. Ellis, General Reed is on the line. He wants to speak." Naomi put on her headphones and nodded slightly. The signal went off. "Naomi, can you hear me?" "Understood, General." Reed's voice this time wasn't the cold tone of a commanding officer. It was deeper, more resonant, carrying the heaviness of someone bearing the weight of a decision that could be scrutinized by the whole world. "We've got reports from the FAA," Reed said. "The video went viral. The public is outraged. And as I predicted, the media called the Department of Defense." Naomi closed her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't want to cause any trouble for the agency." Reed replied immediately and emphatically, "No, Naomi. You're not the one causing the trouble. The trouble is for those who looked at you and thought they understood you." At that moment, Naomi sensed in his words something more than just defense. It was respect. Naomi, Reed continued, his voice slow and deliberate. "I've met many talented people in my life, but only one person has the ability to activate the Sentinel. You don't just represent a mission, you are the mission." Naomi lowered her head gently, tightening the strap of the bag on her lap. Do you really trust me that much? I believe in someone who has spent 7 years of their life creating something that no one else understands. She took a deep breath. Thank you, sir, Reed said, his voice softening. Now focus. When we land at the joint base, we'll transfer you to a high-speed military transport plane. And Naomi, yes, whatever happens at JFK, let us handle the rest. When the connection was cut off, Naomi lowered her hands and leaned her head gently against the back of the seat. Outside the window, gray clouds drifted slowly by. There was something peaceful amidst the chaos. She recalled the moment she was asked to leave the plane. Claudia's cold gaze, her condescending tone, the silence of those who dared not intervene. She thought she was used to being underestimated, but this time, it touched a deeper spot in her heart. What are you thinking about? Asked an agent sitting opposite her. Naomi looked out the window, her voice low but clear. I was thinking, if only it were as simple as activating a satellite antenna. Just the right frequency and the right time. The agent chuckled softly. Humans are far more complex than machines. Naomi replied, yes, because machines would never think I'm dangerous just because of my skin color. No one said anything more. Silence, but it was the silence of those who understood that something important had just been said. The helicopter had been flying for about 20 minutes when Karen contacted them from the ground. Naomi, can you hear me? Understood, Karen. I want you to know the clip from a passenger on the flight has gone over 3 million views. And someone has spoken up in your defense. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Who is it? A flight attendant from another airline posted about how black passengers are often labeled as threatening simply because of their calm demeanor. The post is being widely shared. Naomi closed her eyes. I don't know what to say. I don't expect this to become a movement. Karen said softly. Sometimes, Naomi, the movement seeks out the person least willing to lead. That statement made Naomi sigh. Karen. This won't affect the Sentinel, will it? No, Karen replied. I've made sure all doors are open for you, even if it means using a clause that the FAA only activates once every 10 years. Naomi looked at Karen through the screen, her eyes filled with gratitude. Below, the ground gradually came into view. Wide concrete roads like arteries connected the military zones. A dark gray C-40 military transport plane was waiting on the secondary runway. When the helicopter landed, Naomi saw a group of soldiers standing in 2 rows. An officer approached and saluted. Welcome, Dr. Ellis. The plane has been refueled. We have 47 minutes to take off on schedule. Naomi nodded and quickened her pace to follow them. The wind from the engine made her coat flap, but she didn't stop. She felt she was running not from the injustice but towards something far more important. Stepping onto the plane, she placed the bag containing the quantum seed back beside her. A technician inspected it, then nodded respectfully. This thing, without it, Sentinel is just flying metal. Naomi smiled slightly. Then I won't let the metal fall to the ground. Meanwhile, at JFK Station, public opinion is erupting like fireworks. A group of passengers watched a video on their phones, then looked over at Claudia, who was huddled in her seat, her face pale. A middle-aged woman spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. Unbelievable. She made false accusations to get someone off the plane. Another man shook his head, and the person who got fired is a defense scientist. Good heavens. Claudia trembled. No, I feel unsafe. Greg stood up and walked away a few steps, too embarrassed. Claudia, stop it. Everyone can see you're wrong. The entire compartment was filled with sighs and disapproving glances. Claudia had never felt so small and vulnerable. In the airport control room, screens displayed dozens of announcements. No one spoke loudly. This was no longer a passenger incident, it was a case requiring a large-scale FAA investigation. An airport manager said, I've never seen anything like this. A passenger being wrongly removed led to the entire JFK Airport being frozen. The person next to him replied, not only that, now the online community is demanding that the airline take responsibility. A federal investigation committee is also being formed. In midair, Naomi felt the plane gain altitude. She placed her hand on her bag and closed her eyes for a few seconds. She thought of her mother, the woman who had once said, "Naomi, there will be days when the world tries to push you down. Don't let them make you forget who you are. Today is one such day." She opened her eyes and looked at the clock, showing the remaining time for Sentinel. "We'll make it in time," she whispered. A soldier standing nearby overheard this. He smiled and said, "If anyone can do it in time, it's you." Naomi responded with only a slight nod, but her eyes had regained their familiar sharpness. Even as the world revolves around her in the most chaotic way, Naomi knows she still holds on to what matters most, target. And that goal is drawing her toward the light, despite all the darkness behind it. The C-40 vibrated slightly as it pierced through the last layer of clouds. The western sky opened up into a pale yellow expanse of late afternoon. The Nevada mountain range stretched out in cold, silent, purplish-gray streaks, as if waiting. Inside the cabin, Naomi opened her eyes after a brief moment of rest. An officer approached Dr. Ellis. "We have 51 minutes to reach the base. If nothing changes, you will make it to the base on time." Naomi nodded, her voice soft but firm. "Thank you." She looked out the window. Small specks of light from the observation posts were scattered across the red earth. These were the places where she had stood, argued, and defended her ideas until she was exhausted. And now Sentinel, her brainchild, is counting on these final hours. Suddenly, a soldier ran in from the cockpit, looking tense. "We have a new situation. There's a call requesting a direct connection to Dr. Ellis, from the airline." Naomi paused slightly. "An airline? Who is it?" "Their CEO is Marcus Finn." The plane cabin fell silent for a few seconds. Karen from the ground connected via a secure link. "Naomi, if you don't want to talk, I can decline on your behalf." But Naomi shook her head. "No, I'll say it. Sometimes facing the truth is the only way to change it." An agent handed over the communication device. The connection sound rang twice, then stabilized. A middle-aged man's voice rang out, trembling slightly from the pressure. "Dr. Ellis, I am Marcus Finn, CEO of Airwave Airlines. I hope you will allow me to apologize." Naomi placed her hand on the strap of her bag, her heart tightening slightly. "Mr. Finn, when I left the plane, none of you wanted to hear the truth. Now you're apologizing. Is it because of public pressure, or because you truly understand what happened?" Finn choked for a few seconds. "Both. The video says it all. We were wrong. My team was wrong. My flight crew was wrong. I take full responsibility." Naomi spoke slowly, each word clear. "I'm not hurt because they were wrong. I'm hurt because they believed the wrong thing so easily." Finn sighed, like someone carrying a burden he himself didn't fully understand. "I know, no apology is enough. But I hope you'll allow me to speak to you in person when you return." Naomi was silent for a moment, then said, "If I see you again, it won't be to hear an apology. It will be to talk about how to protect other passengers like me in the future. Are you ready for that?" Finn replied immediately without hesitation. "I'm ready." Naomi nodded. "Then we'll talk when this mission is over." The connection is off. The plane fell silent again. But this time it was the silence of those who had just witnessed a significant step, not for Sentinel but for something bigger change. The flight continued to proceed smoothly for a few more minutes before the captain made the announcement. "Dr. Ellis, we're about to descend. Nevada is experiencing strong winds. You should fasten your seatbelt." Naomi obeyed, pulling the strap over her shoulder. The wind began to pound against the aircraft's fuselage. The windows rattled slightly, like an unsteady heartbeat. The last rays of sunlight stretched across the desert, making the entire scene look like a painting someone was shaking their hand to paint. An agent looked at Naomi and asked, "Are you scared?" She chuckled softly. I once stood outside in -20 degrees Celsius snow for 3 hours calibrating a geolock sensor. I think I can handle this kind of wind." The agent chuckled. "I have to admit you're the most stubborn person I've ever met." Naomi turned her gaze away. "I'm not stubborn. I'm just used to enduring hardship to achieve my goals." A moment of silence, both in science and in life. The sudden jolt jolted Naomi out of her thoughts. The plane tilted to the right, shaking violently. The pilot's voice boomed over the internal radio. Unusual gusts of wind. Adjusting course. A distant clap of thunder echoed, though the sky was nearly clear. A swirling wind created trails of dust on the ground. Naomi looked outside, her heart sinking slightly. A strange feeling ran down her spine. Karen immediately connected from the ground. "Naomi, the radar is reporting an unusual electromagnetic interference area near the base. We're investigating." "Where did the interference come from?" Naomi asked, her voice serious. Karen said, "It's not yet confirmed, but it's located right in the area of Station 3, where Sentinel's backup data is stored." She felt her blood freeze. "No way. Station 3 isn't allowed to operate today," Karen replied. "Yes. And that's the problem." The pilot's voice interrupted. "Dr. Ellis, can you explain why interference occurred when your system was in preparation mode?" Naomi closed her eyes for a few seconds, then opened them with a piercing gaze. "Sentinel doesn't create interference on its own. If there's interference, then someone has tampered with the subsystem." A soldier standing nearby frowned. "You mean someone is vandalizing?" Naomi didn't answer immediately. She thought back to the hundreds of presentations she had given, the dozens of times she had to defend her project, the funding disputes, and the organizations that opposed the militarization of technology. At the same time, the plane shook more violently. Pilot's voice, "2 minutes to descend. Hold position," Naomi whispered almost, but everyone heard. "If anyone wants Sentinel to fail, today is their only chance." The air in the cabin felt heavy and leaden. Unexpectedly, Karen reported from the ground. "Naomi, we've just detected an unauthorized access signal to the Sentinel's backup layer. Someone is trying to bypass the boot process." The whole cabin shook at the news, and Naomi jumped to her feet. "Turn off the secondary connection. Do you hear me, Karen? Turn it off immediately," Karen replied. "It's in progress, but the response time is slower than usual." Naomi regained a strange calm, a calmness that only appears when her brain enters a state of absolute concentration. "Karen, listen to me. If the backup code is breached, Sentinel can still operate if we activate parallel sync using quantum seed." But why?" Naomi tightened her grip on her bag. "But only if I'm at the control center before tea hour." Karen breathed heavily. "Then you need to land even faster." Naomi glanced at the watch on her wrist. 42 minutes. "That's enough if there are no further problems." Outside the window, the Nevada base began to appear. Rows of low buildings, silver antenna masts rising like arrows pointing to the sky. The plane shook violently one last time before stabilizing. She could feel the landing gear preparing to touch down. Naomi placed her hand on her quantum seed pouch. For the first time since leaving JFK, she felt a clear sense of unease, not just about Sentinel, but about the truth that was unfolding. Someone tried to sabotage it, and that person could very well be right within the organization she once trusted. The plane tilted downwards. Nevada ground was approaching very close. Naomi took a deep, gentle but determined breath. The truth must come to light. Sentinel must live. The landing gear touched down on the Nevada runway with a long, sharp screech. In that moment, Naomi felt as if her heart had just plummeted with the plane and then bounced back up. She had no time to breathe, no time to reflect on the chaotic journey from JFK. All she had now were the seconds slipping away like sand through her fingers. The pilot announced over the radio, "Dr. Ellis, we've arrived at base. The special operations vehicle is waiting." You will be taken directly to the Sentinel Control Center. The airplane door swung open. The Nevada desert wind rushed into the cabin, carrying with it the dry, scorching heat and the distinctive smell of sun-baked earth and rocks. The late afternoon sky stretched out in a pale orange-purple hue, breathtakingly beautiful, but not enough to make Naomi slow down even a single step. Two agents ran up, gesturing, "Dr. Ellis, please follow us. Time is of the essence." Naomi clutched her quantum seed bag tightly as she descended the steps, the wind howling. She saw the black armored SUV parked just a few meters away, the engine running, the tailgate open. But what made her pause for a moment was the person standing next to the SUV. General Matthew Reed. He rarely leaves Washington, but today he's here. For her. For Sentinel. Naomi approached. Reed didn't say anything grand. He simply placed his hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle pat. "Thank you for making it in time." Naomi looked him straight in the eye. "How serious is the situation?" Reed opened the door for her. "It's to the point where I can't believe it's a coincidence." The SUV sped like an arrow along the paved roads leading to the base. On either side were rows of low steel gray buildings, so simple they were almost empty. But behind that simplicity lay control rooms, computers, power centers, and high-density communication systems, the lifeblood of Sentinel. No one spoke for a moment. Only the sound of the engine and the wind whipping against the car body could be heard. Finally, Reed spoke up. "Naomi, the electromagnetic interference isn't random. It appeared precisely when you were delayed. When you weren't here." Naomi tightened her grip on her bag, saying thoughtfully, "That means someone wants to rush me." Reed nodded. "And that person knows full well if she doesn't show up, the system will lack her biometric signature. Sentinel won't be able to run properly." Naomi looked out the window. The antenna masts seemed to pierce the sky. She sensed a subtle but persistent threat lurking around the project, the very project she had tried to protect for years. "Who do you suspect?" she asked. Reed replied in a voice so cold it brought the entire train car to a standstill. "More than one organization wants Sentinel to fail. But anyone who can compromise the backup code can't be an outsider." Naomi turned her head quickly. "You mean internally?" Reed didn't answer immediately. His silence was confirmation. The SUV stopped in front of the Sentinel control building. White lights shone from the entrance, creating a sharp, blade-like streak of light against the darkening sky. Reed whispered, "Let's go. You have 31 minutes." The control center's doors opened using two-factor authentication. The interior space was large, cold, and brightly lit, filled with screens, control panels, and the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. All the staff stood up when Naomi walked in. An engineer rushed in. "Dr. Ellis, we've blocked the unauthorized connection, but the backup code has been partially altered. We don't dare make any further moves without your help." Naomi nodded. "Take me to the main control panel." She hurried to her station, a semicircular control panel with 3 layers of screens. A quick glance was enough for her to know something was wrong. "The initialization code has its logic reversed," she said. A young engineer standing nearby replied, "Yes. Someone deliberately created a loop error. If we boot up in this state, Sentinel will automatically go into deep sleep mode." Naomi looked up at the large clock on the wall. The second hand moved as if it were racing against itself. She took a deep breath. "Okay, I'll revise it line by line. But we need to use parallel control to avoid conflicts." Reed stood behind her and whispered, "Do you have enough time?" Naomi didn't turn back. "There's no other choice." While she was working, a faint alarm sounded. An employee reported, "We have an unscheduled visitor, someone who requested entry to the security area." Reed immediately asked who. He said his name was Evan Locke, Sentinel's Vice President of Engineering in charge of the redundant code layer. The air in the room was freezing. Naomi looked up quickly. "No way. Evan is on leave this week." "Why is he here?" Reed gave a firm order. "Keep him in the waiting room. Don't let him in." Naomi stared at the screen in front of her. A cold thought flashed through her mind like a weak electric current. Evan was someone she had once trusted, someone who understood the Sentinel system second only to her, and someone who had the authority to access the backup code. But before she could say anything, the security guard continued. He insisted on meeting Dr. Ellis. He said only she would understand what he was trying to warn her about. Reed frowned. "What warning?" he said. "The electromagnetic interference wasn't caused by sabotage," the staff member read out his words, "but rather the consequence of Sentinel itself activating in the wrong sequence." Naomi jumped to her feet. "What's the wrong order?" she asked loudly. The employee continued. "He said the backup code wasn't tampered with. It activated itself due to a power surge error in the final charging sequence." Naomi felt her heart skip a beat. She turned to Reed. "If that's true, then the system has been unstable since this morning." Reed crossed his arms. "Do you believe Evan?" Naomi looked down at her hands, the hands that had once written every line of code, designed every layer of Sentinel's structure. "Evan has never lied to me," she said. "But he's also never been this late for work like he was today." At that moment, everything in the room seemed to hang in the balance. No one knew whether to believe Evan's warning or view it as another ploy. Reed asked Naomi directly, "Do you want to meet him or not?" Naomi looked at her watch. 18 minutes. She had only one choice: meet Evan and hope he wasn't a threat, or ignore him and handle everything herself, risking Sentinel's own demise if his prediction was correct. Naomi said firmly, "Bring him in. But keep security outside." Reed nodded, though he clearly didn't like it. "You're responsible for this decision, Naomi." She looked him straight in the eye. "I've been in charge of Sentinel from day one, and I still am today." The back door swung open. Evan stepped in, looking exhausted, his hair disheveled, his t-shirt covered in dust and sand. He didn't look like a vandal. He looked more like someone who had run for hours across the desert just to get here on time. Naomi immediately asked, "Why are you here, and what do you mean by the backup code being swapped?" Evan gasped, placing both hands on the control panel. "Naomi, I was monitoring Sentinel remotely while you were held at JFK. I discovered the power supply pulse at Station 3 had an incorrect amplitude right from the last system test." Naomi frowned. "But why is the code reversed?" "I flipped it," Evan said, his voice trembling. The room erupted in gasps. Reed stepped forward, clenching his fist. Naomi said slowly, "Why did you do that?" Evan looked her straight in the eye without flinching. "Because if it doesn't reverse, the Sentinel will launch the wrong sequence. And if it launches the wrong sequence, the satellite array will be permanently out of orbit. I don't want you to activate it in that state." Naomi froze. A cold sensation ran from her neck down her back. Evan continued, "Naomi, I'm not causing destruction. I'm saving Sentinel." The control room fell silent, so silent that you could hear the ticking of the wall clock's second hand. Naomi gazed at Evan for a long time, her eyes filled with both suspicion and hope. Then she turned to her engineer. "Check the energy data again right now." They did it. Just 20 seconds later, an engineer shouted, "Dr. Ellis, Evan is right. The energy amplitude is off by 0.07%. If we run the sequence normally, the Sentinel will be off course." Naomi sank slightly into her chair. "It's not sabotage. It's a warning. It's saving the system." Naomi turned to Evan and said, "Why didn't you tell me this morning?" Evan swallowed hard. "I tried to contact her, but she's stuck because of what happened at JFK. Everyone thinks I'm messing with the system, so they blocked my access." Naomi breathed heavily, as if releasing all the pent-up pressure from the flight, from the incident, from the mission. She stood up and extended her hand towards Evan. "Thank you." Evan looked at the hand for a few seconds, then took it as a sign of acceptance. Naomi ordered team get ready for editing mode. "We have 14 minutes left." The entire room seemed to move as if activated by an invisible electric current. Reed approached Naomi, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "You made the right choice. Once again." Naomi smiled, a small but powerful smile. "We're not finished yet, General. The Sentinels are still waiting." The control room was bathed in a cool, bluish-white light, yet unmistakably filled with a pervasive feeling, the sensation of standing on the brink of historic success and irreversible failure. The countdown clock on the wall was flashing 13 minutes and 42 seconds. Naomi stood in the center of the control room. Around her, engineers raced against time, working with every line of code, every signal, every alert that appeared and disappeared on dozens of screens. Evan sat to her left, concentrating so intensely that his jaw was stiff. Reed stood behind him, arms crossed, his gaze serious but revealing a hint of worry. An engineer reported, "Dr. Ellis, the correction startup sequence is ready. But if the amplitude increases by 0.01%, the entire system will lock up." Naomi immediately replied, "Then we mustn't let it exceed that level." She didn't need to think. She had memorized these parameters as easily as her heartbeat over the past 7 years. A low but clear voice boomed from the internal loudspeaker, "Launch Center notice. The final activation window will open in 12 minutes. Naomi turned to the team, "Maintain all communication channels. Don't lose signal from Sentinel for even a second." Then she said to Evan, just loud enough for the two of them to hear, "Are you sure about these values?" Evan nodded, his voice slightly hoarse. "I checked 3 times. Naomi, I'm not taking a risk saying this. I'm absolutely certain." Naomi looked into his eyes for a few seconds. From that gaze she read honesty, tension, and the fear that she might ruin everything if she made a mistake. She placed her hands on the keyboard. "Okay, do what Sentinel needs." Another engineer shouted, "The electrical pulse is fluctuating slightly." Naomi pointed to the screen, "Lock it immediately. Switch to frequency dispersion mode. Don't let the signal bounce back." The room buzzed with the sound of typing, fast, steady, and frantic. Reed whispered, "Naomi, can you control this?" She didn't turn around, her eyes fixed on the rapidly moving numbers. "I don't just control it, I understand it, like I understand my own breath." 11 minutes and 05 seconds. A red warning light flashed. "Satellite synchronization data for satellite #2 is delayed by 0.3 milliseconds. Everyone stopped. Evan took a deep breath. This isn't good. Such a delay could cause the entire satellite cluster to go out of sync. Naomi quickly typed a series of commands. "I will bridge the data using a secondary channel. Push the signal to line 4. An engineer stared in disbelief. "But line 4 has never been tested in real-world conditions." Naomi replied, "Today is reality." The room fell silent. The only sound was the electronic torrent of data streaming across the screen. A soft ping sound was heard. An engineer exclaimed, "The signal has resynchronized. Satellite number 2 is stable." Reed let out a sigh of relief, a soft but clear one. 9 minutes and 22 seconds. The system switched to the final authentication screen. A blue light flickered across the room, reflecting off Naomi's face. The system's voice was even and cold, requesting biometric authentication of core code owner, Dr. Naomi Ellis. Naomi placed her hand on the scanner. A light shone on her palm. She could hear her heartbeat, not fast, but heavy. In that instant she recalled Claudia's gaze, the silence of the flight crew, the humiliation of stepping off the plane she had paid for like any other passenger. And now, those very hands once looked down upon will decide the fate of a multi-billion-dollar defense project. The scanner lit up. Verification 1/2 successful. Naomi placed her eyes on the retinal scanner. A blue light swept across her resolute eyes. Verification 2/2 complete. The screen turned white. Everyone in the room held their breath. 8 minutes and 11 seconds. Naomi opened her bag and took out the quantum seed, a small palm-sized device encased in a matte black titanium shell. She handed it to the technician in charge of the core connector. He looked at it with reverence as if it were a treasure. "Without this, Sentinel is just an empty shell." Naomi nodded. "That's right." She manually plugged seed into the connector. A stream of white light spread across the thin glass panels of the control station, as if the system were waking up from a long sleep. The main screen displays quantum seed received. Ready to activate parallel sync, Naomi said. Everyone in position. We're going to begin the trigger sequence. Reed took a step forward. Naomi, I just wanted you to know you've come a very long way to get here. Naomi smiled softly. And this path isn't meant to end at the JFK station entrance. Reed chuckled a soft but powerful laugh. 6 minutes and 00 seconds. The satellite orbit display appeared on the screen. 3 satellites were in near-perfect positions, but one final signal was missing to lock onto the orbital path. Naomi typed the first command. Start parallel chain on floor 3. Evan typed again. Stabilize floor 4. An engineer typed the command switch the auxiliary signal to the backup channel. Their working rhythm is like that of an orchestra. Naomi is the conductor, and Sentinel is a symphony unlike anything seen before. 4 minutes and 28 seconds. Suddenly, a bright red warning light flashed on feedback error. Synchronization layer 2 interrupted. Everyone in the room gasped. No, not now, Evan mumbled. Reed approached Naomi. Is there a problem? Naomi pursed her lips, her eyes glued to the screen. If the feedback loop remains unstable for another 10 seconds, the Sentinel will lock itself. Reed tensed up. And what if it locks itself? Naomi replied, in a choked but firm voice. The satellite will be off course forever, and the mission will fail. No one is breathing. Evan shouted. Push the signal back through the main line. Naomi shouted even louder. No, that will overload the system. She typed a long string of commands so quickly that the sound of the keyboard echoed like a downpour. Evan looked at the screen she was working on. Naomi, what are you doing? Convert the pulse to a soft loop mode. The system will self-correct in 0.4 seconds. But I've never tried it, Evan exclaimed in shock. Naomi replied, today is the day to try. She pressed enter. The screen flickered violently. The whole room held its breath. Already, everything turned green. An engineer shouted, the pulse has stabilized. Another person slammed their hand on the table. It's done, it's done. Reed sighed heavily, his hands resting on the table for balance. Naomi bowed her head, letting out a soft but long sigh, as if a mountain had been lifted from her shoulders. 2 minutes and 01 second. Naomi stood up straight. She looked around the room at the people who had been incredibly tense for the past 10 minutes. Okay, she said. Begin the final trigger sequence. The system voice rang out, parallel sync series beginning. All the lights in the room dimmed. The electrical power was concentrated on the main core. Naomi placed one hand on the control panel and the other on the quantum seed pouch. She whispered not to someone else but to Sentinel itself. Let's function in the same way we created each other. The signal propagates. A bright line sweeps across the screen. 0 minutes, 00 seconds. The lighting system is blazing, Sentinel Array operating. The whole room erupted in cheers. Evan clutched his head, laughing like someone who had just come back to life after falling into an abyss. Reed placed his hand on Naomi's shoulder, squeezing gently. You just saved one of the most critical systems we've ever had. Naomi looked at the screen at the stabilizing orbital paths at the Sentinel glowing in space. She smiled, a very small smile, but enough to encompass 7 years of effort, 7 years of endurance, 7 years of rising above injustice. In that moment she knew one thing: no one could stop her from getting here. Not prejudice, not contempt, not an entire airport frozen in place. She won not with shouting, but with expertise, with perseverance, with dignity. The lights on the control panel dimmed to a steady state. The earlier cheers faded into the air, leaving only soft, emotional breaths. With the most intense part of the battle over the Sentinel control room was silent. No more typing, no more frantic warnings. Instead, there was something else, a silence filled with pride. Naomi stood in the center of the room. Before her, the Sentinel's orbit was displayed in perfect blue curves, 3 satellites glowing like tiny diamonds orbiting Earth. Beside her, the energy fluctuation readings had returned to ideal levels, so much so that the engineers had to double-check to make sure they weren't mistaken. General Reed approached, placing his hand on Naomi's shoulder this time, not just out of respect. In the old general's eyes was a peace he himself hadn't expected to feel at this moment. "Naomi," he said softly, "you didn't just save Sentinel, you saved the reputation of an entire defense program. The whole country will be grateful to you." Naomi shook her head slightly. "I didn't do it for the country. Not at first. I did it because of my responsibility and because the team placed their trust in me. I did it for myself." Reed smiled, full of pride. "Any reason is valid, as long as you maintain your dignity. And today you stood tall in a way that not everyone can." Evan approached, standing still for a moment as if waiting for Naomi to be free. She turned and offered a very small smile, gentle but clear. "Thank you, Evan," Naomi said. "Without your warning, Sentinel would have failed." Evan smiled, but there was a hint of genuine emotion in his eyes. "Naomi, I only did my part. You're still the one bearing the burden." Naomi looked back at the screen, her hand resting lightly on the control panel. No one is alone today. As Naomi stepped out of the control room, the Nevada evening wind was colder than usual, but for her that chill was just enough to remind her that she was still alive, still intact after a day when anyone else might have collapsed. An SUV was waiting to take her back to her accommodation. On the way, Karen called. The sound on the phone was a little muffled, but Karen's voice was clear. "Naomi, the whole country is talking about you." Naomi leaned her head back against the seat, gazing at the night sky stretching out outside the window. "I guess so. I just hope the story isn't misinterpreted." "No," Karen said firmly. "They understood correctly. They saw a woman being treated unfairly, yet she remained calm, stood up and accomplished a task that hundreds of people couldn't have done." Naomi paused for a few seconds. "I don't want to become any kind of icon." Karen chuckled softly. "Those who don't want to be icons are often the most deserving." Naomi sighed softly. "I just want to live a normal life," Karen replied. "You might be back to normal tomorrow, but tonight, you're living proof for so many people." The call ended, leaving Naomi with a strange feeling, not pride, not exactly joy, but a deep, profound one, a feeling that only those who have faced challenges can understand. The following morning, Naomi was invited to the base's temporary office to see the first report from the Sentinel. 3 young engineers were waiting for her at the door, their faces beaming like children seeing fireworks for the first time. "Dr. Ellis, the signal from the Sentinel is sharper than expected. The system is working smoothly with no lag." Naomi looked at the charts they showed her. Perfect curves, stable data columns, smooth, silky signal waves. They all told her one thing: Sentinel lives. And it lives exactly as she had imagined. She gently touched the screen as if touching a living being. One engineer said, "The whole team is grateful to you, Dr. Ellis. Without you, Sentinel would never have been possible." Naomi smiled, a gentle smile she usually reserved for those who truly moved her. "I'm just the rhythm setter. You are the music." That afternoon, a press conference was held in Washington, D.C. On the large screen in the base's conference room, Naomi watched as the Department of Defense spokesperson announced the Sentinel's success. During the press conference, when asked about the hero behind Sentinel, the spokesperson said something that left Naomi speechless. "Some victories don't resound with the sound of cannons or military insignia. They resound in the perseverance of people who never give up, even when the world thinks they are insignificant. Sentinel is the achievement of hundreds of people, but without Dr. Naomi Ellis, it would not have spoken." Naomi turned off the screen. She placed her hand on her chest and closed her eyes. Not out of pride, but out of emotion. Emotional in a way that made her want to stand alone for a few minutes to catch her breath. Somewhere in my memory, the image of her standing in the middle of the airplane cabin, Claudia's gaze, the baseless accusation, the silence of the passengers, the suspicious looks, it all came flooding back. But this time, they didn't break her heart as much as before. This time they only gave her a deeper understanding of her journey. No one can define her value except herself. The day Naomi left the base to return to New York, the engineering team and General Reed lined up to see her off. As she boarded the military aircraft's gangway, Reed called after her, "Naomi." She turned back. Reed raised his hand in greeting, his eyes somber but containing a rare smile. "Thank you for not giving up at JFK." Naomi responded with a sentence that left everyone standing there speechless for a few seconds. Sometimes, people think they've knocked someone down, but in reality, they've only helped that person stand stronger. Reed smiled and nodded. "You're right, and you've proven that to the whole country." As the plane took off, Naomi looked out the window. Below, the Nevada desert shrank, then transformed into abstract bands of color. The heavy feeling in her heart from yesterday was gone. Only gratitude remained. Grateful to the engineering team. Grateful to Reed and Karen. Grateful to Evan. Grateful to those who believed. And strangely enough, grateful to those who didn't believe, because they made today's victory even more meaningful. She leaned her head back against the chair, whispering something only she could hear. Sentinel is more than just a system. It's proof that I deserve it. And you, the listener of this story, if you have ever experienced a moment of being misjudged, looked down upon, or left out, remember Naomi Ellis. Not because she's a genius, not because she saved a billion-dollar project, but she chose to stand tall, even when people forced her to bend down. Remember, you are valuable, even if others don't see it. And sometimes, it's challenges that bring the light within you to the surface. If this story resonates with you, gives you hope, or makes you think of someone who deserves more respect, please like this video, please share it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more healing and empowering stories like this. Thank you for listening until the very end. See you in the next story.